Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at what happened in week 7 of the Overwatch League, the first weekend of the Midseason Madness Qualifiers. 13 games this weekend, all in the Western region. Definitely an interesting week, not my best week, so let's throw up what happened and take a look at it. So as you can see, my big picks on the week, 0-2, really dropped the ball on those, as well as 8-5 overall. So not a great week, still largely positive, but not a great week, all things considered. So let's jump in and let's talk about some of these matches. I got a lot of things to say about a couple teams here, and so we're going to kind of jump in and talk about it. First match of the weekend was the London Spitfire taking on the Florida Mayhem. And this is definitely the team that I want to talk about. One of the most teams, I don't know what I'm saying. One of the teams I'm talking about the most is the London Spitfire. I was very, very impressed by the Spitfire this weekend. They had a very good 2-0 weekend, beating two teams who were ahead of them in the standings. Now, only one of them is ahead of them in the standings now, technically, from what I recall. But overall, a very good weekend for this team, and something that I think you have to really consider when you think about what we're doing as we head into this Midseason Madness is what teams impress you when it matters most. What teams impress you down the stretch? What teams look the best right here, right now? And this London Spitfire team actually looks pretty good, right? We're not talking about a team who found wins against like New York and Vancouver. This is a team whose victories were over the Defiant and the Mayhem. So these are two teams who have been, relatively speaking, performing at a decently high level. Now, the Defiant, bit of an asterisk there. We'll talk about them in a little bit. But the Mayhem win was a solid win, especially when it wasn't like the Mayhem were playing poorly. Hydron had a very good game. He looked very, very good on the Sojourn. He looks very comfortable on the hero. Looks to be one of actually the better Sojourns, in my opinion, in the league. So very impressive win from the Spitfire, who actually outplayed a Mayhem roster that has looked pretty good. They looked good, not just on Hottie comps, but also with Poco in. They looked good as well. Backbone's having a very good season. Shax looks very good. This team looks to be what we thought they would be last season. Obviously, some major changes to this roster. It is not the same team as it was a year ago. There's some of the same pieces like Shax and Hottie and why can't I think of his name? Sparker. But we have a very good-looking support line now. I think that Landon had a very good series, and I think that overall we've seen Admiral play very, very well. So this is a team that I think looked pretty good. I think this is a meta that is going to favor them pretty well. And so I'm pretty excited to see what the Spitfire do going forward. They definitely don't have the toughest schedule, this stage, which is going to be beneficial to them. There is an argument to be made that these were their two toughest matches of the tournament. I have to pull up their schedule again real quick just so I remember it exactly. But relatively speaking, they have a pretty easy-looking schedule going forward, and it could be a team who we see make a massive, massive, massive run as we go later on into this tournament. I know they play New York next weekend. That's definitely a winnable game, a game you'd favor them. They play Paris and Washington, two teams where you definitely think they can beat both of those teams. And then they end the tournament with a game against the Dallas Fuel. So that is a tough one. That is definitely the chance that they probably may fall there. But based on what we've seen from them so far, their overall spot in the standings right now is pretty good if they can get some wins over some of those other teams. Right? Mayhem, I'll talk more about them later with their win later in the week. But not a bad showing from them. The second game on Thursday was the San Francisco Shock beating the Dallas Fuel. Pretty dominant win from the Shock. It was a 3-0. The Fuel had a very rough weekend. They lost both of their matches, spoiler alert. But the Shock, I think, are going to thrive pretty well in this meta. I think Mikey actually brings a lot to this team as a player who can play like the Ball and the Reinhardt at a pretty high level. I think Kaluch still looks good, but with the way that Ball is getting a lot of play time, I actually think Mikey brings a lot to this roster. We still saw a lot of Kaluj. When you have that double flex support meta, which we're having now with Zen and Bap, that really allows this Shock roster to excel when you have two really good flex support players in Finn and Violet. So good showing from them. Very good team this weekend. I think they're one of those teams who, this is definitely a place where the meta favors them. They had weaknesses last meta where they couldn't really play to their strengths fully. They are a little limited in what they can play, but this was a really good look from them because they actually got to play the things they are really good at. and they didn't have to play, Violet on a role he's not as comfortable on. And I think that really helped. And I think adding Mikey to this roster to give them a little more tank flexibility is good for them. The Fuel are a confusing team. I think part of the problem is that Chio's BAP is not really as effective as someone like Violet or as somebody like Finn. And it's also tough to gauge how good Dallas is because they did play 2 tough opponents this weekend. They didn't do well against these opponents, obviously. They had a very, 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 very rough tournament outing this weekend, obviously going 0-2, and they played Shock and Rain, both of whom were top teams in last tournament. But it is definitely a little concerning based on what we saw from them. They did not look great this weekend. They had a tough weekend. And I think that really the DPS was interesting. They kind of played some Gurio, who looked pretty good. He didn't look terrible. They played. I don't even know if they played much Edison, if any at all. We saw a lot of Sparkle. They didn't seem too comfortable. I think Wrecking Ball is a bit of an issue for this team. They don't look great with Hanbin or Fearless on Wrecking Ball, so I just think that they are a little uncomfortable. Chio doesn't feel as comfortable. Their tank doesn't feel as comfortable. They looked like they didn't know quite what to do with their DPS, so I think they'll be fine going forward. I think they'll adapt and adjust. I think this first weekend is just tough because they have to play 2 very tough opponents. Final match on Thursday is the Washington Justice against the New York Excelsior. I don't even want to talk about the New York Excelsior in this match. I'll talk about them in the Paris Eternal match later in the weekend because that game to me was more telling for where that team is at. The Justice are a good team. Obviously, New York took a map off of them at the beginning of the series, but Justice kind of rolled them the rest of the way. About what I expected, 3-1 win for the Justice. Justice didn't look too impressive, but, they played New York, so it doesn't really matter at that point in time. Moving on to Friday, London Spitfire once again get a win. That was a big pick game for me. Got that one wrong. I thought the Defiant would beat the Spitfire, and not only did Spitfire win, they won pretty convincingly. They looked very, very good. I think they really are a team that is interesting. Going into this weekend, if you had asked me what is one team who I think is one of the most intriguing teams to look out for in this tournament, it is the London Spitfire because they barely missed out on making the kickoff clash, and their schedule looked to be one of the easier schedules in the league. And so you had this feeling potentially like maybe this was actually a chance for the Spitfire to have a really good run if they could get some of these wins early on. And they found the wins in the first weekend, which is really good when you're a team that doesn't really have a tough schedule this time around. It's very easy for them to go 5-1, potentially even 6-0 if the Fuel continue to struggle in this cycle. And I think that could potentially be a thing that pushes them into the Midseason Madness. Because the Defiant are struggling. They're already ahead of the Defiant. They beat the Mayhem, so Mayhem have them beat on points. But if the Mayhem lose a game, that could be where something where the Spitfire jump ahead of them. Then they're kind of competing with your Outlaws and your Rain. But there's enough spots where I think the Spitfire could realistically jump. Defiant, I don't think there's really much to learn from the Defiant. They obviously they don't have a head coach right now, or they have an interim coach playing as head coach. So we'll have to wait and see where this Defiant team is at. I think that they just kind of, at this point in time, their season might be shot. That was kind of a pretty weak showing from them, and I think losing a head coach who was probably who's probably a pretty big part of the team, I think they might not be very good throughout the rest of the season. I just think they have a little bit of weakness, and I think that they just don't look like they have things together. An interesting game for me was the Boston Uprising against the Atlanta Reign, because the Atlanta Reign, dominant to start, 2-0, went up. Kai looks incredible in the Sojourn. It was almost a reverse sweep for the Boston Uprising. They really started to look good on the third and fourth maps. It goes to a map 5, if I recall correctly. Maybe I'm making things up and it didn't go to map 5, but I'm pretty sure it went to a map 5, if I recall correctly, in which the Boston Uprising just kind of stopped playing good comps. And they ran like a Bastion comp out of nowhere. I mean, in Kai's post-match interview, he basically said, I don't even know what they were doing. Like, they kind of just started throwing, but running a bad comp. So, like, Boston could have won this game, realistically, if they, based on how they were playing. But they just kind of threw. I think Reign getting challenged a little bit, I think, helped them a bit, because it helped them kind of see where they need to clean things up. So, I think ultimately it was a good win for the Reign. I think it helps them out a lot. You don't want to, lose too much. The Reign are a team, I don't really get concerned about them when they lose, because I think they're a team that simply doesn't really care about regular season games as much as they do with tournament matches. They had a really good run in the kickoff clash, and that's kind of one of the things that makes me think that way, is they don't really mind losing to a good team. or any team during the tournament as long as they make it. They're not going to go all out necessarily every single match, I think. They'll try, but I think they're always a team that kind of turns it on when it matters most. So they're interesting to watch. Good win from them. Definitely something I was impressed by. And curious to see what they do going forward, because they have a pretty good-looking Sojourn right now. And if Sojourn is as good as she looks to be right now, the rest of this tournament cycle, stopping Kai might actually be one of the most difficult parts for any team to try to accomplish in this tournament, because he looks amazing on the hero. Gladiators beat the Titans as a somewhat one-sided victory. The Titans did manage to win a map, which is a pretty big deal. Deepay on his revenge tour. This was the better game for the Titans this weekend. They did not look good in their second match of the weekend, but they looked okay against the Gladiators. I think that it was, for me, a somewhat respectable performance from them. I definitely don't think that they looked to be an elite level team. They definitely look like they're improving. I think Deepay coming in will have a positive impact on this team. I think they will get better as time goes on. But all in all, I don't think it was necessarily a really good result from them. I think it was a good result. They're definitely still a team that has a lot of room to make up. They definitely have to get back to being where they were. I think that they have potential, but I think this tournament cycle is going to be very, very hard for them and almost impossible for them because they play a bunch of really good teams. I think the only game I realistically think they have a chance of winning this stage is against, I think, the Justice they play. So it's a tough outing for the Titans this tournament cycle, but I'm curious to see where this team is at kind of the after the Midseason Madness, once we get into a place where they play a little bit more easy in terms of who they get to play. And then they'll have had a whole stage under Deepay's leadership. That's kind of where I think this team is really going to be interesting to look at. Right now, I don't think this team is going to be doing much. They can improve bit by bit. I think really the thing I'm waiting for is to see how things go when it gets to actual midseason, past Midseason Madness, once we're getting into Summer Showdown Kickoff Clash, or Countdown Cup, how this team performs then. Right now, I don't think there's much to talk about with them, so we'll move on from that. My second big pick was the Justice Outlaws match. I picked the Justice like an idiot because I still have faith in this Justice team. It was a relatively close series. It was a 3-2, but the Outlaws did pull it away in the end. The Outlaws, honestly, kind of surprised me right now. I thought the Outlaws would struggle a bit this tournament cycle. They do benefit from the fact that they have double flex support, and that is kind of the meta right now. You can get away with playing your double flex supports, and so I think that you are able to play more things when you can do that. Sigma is also getting a lot of playtime. Sigma, Wrecking Ball, those are kind of some of the heroes we're seeing a lot of in this tournament cycle right now. And so that benefits the Outlaws a bit because they have a very good Sigma player in Piggy. Dante has been back in on the Tracer in a number of these series. So I think that helps the Outlaws out a lot. I think that's one of the things that I'm looking at with this team is that they have the ability to actually play some heroes or players in their comfort roles again. And you get to enable Piggy to play his best hero. That helps the team look a lot better. They look much more coordinated than I think they did in the Kickoff Clash, and so that helps. Obviously, they have two flex supports, so in a double flex support meta, that helps as well. So all in all, I'm pretty impressed with what we saw from the Outlaws in this game. Justice didn't look terrible. I think they're an interesting team. They did not play Happy as much as I thought they would. They subbed him out in some places I didn't really agree with. I think they took him out going into map 5, and he was playing really, really well, so that kind of surprised me. They've been playing Assassin on Control pretty much every game. I still think that there's some weird switches this team makes, and I think they need to solidify their roster more and figure out exactly who they want to be. But generally speaking, I think pretty highly of this Justice roster still. There's some things to clean up, but Vigilante is going to come of age in this tournament cycle, and if it's double flex support with Vigilante Krillin, this team might be nasty, so be on the lookout for that. Gladiators beat the Eternal. What you kind of expected. Gladiators are a top team in the league. Eternal are one of the bottom teams in the league. So you kind of expected this result. Not like a terrible showing from the Eternal, but definitely not anything to write home about. Nothing that made you feel super confident in what they showed. They looked okay, but they didn't look like anything extraordinary. They were just a good team that managed to do some pretty good things, and so I feel like you have to definitely feel better about where this team is at than they were going into last tournament cycle. And of course we'll talk about Paris again with their match against the NYXL, but all in all pretty good. But Gladiators, good weekend from them. I think they are still looking like the best team in the Western region. They were pretty dominant. I still think they have the flexibility you need to be good, and so nothing really changed in my opinion on them this weekend. Reign beating the Fuel, big win for the Reign. It was a 3-0 win for the Reign. Definitely solidified them as a top team in this tournament right now. We saw a ton of Venom, a lot of Tracer getting played. I think Dallas is just too confused, like I kind of said before. I think they have a lot of things they want to try to do. They have too many pieces. They're trying to figure out what works best. In theory, they should be good running Sigma because that is one of Hanbin's best heroes. They just look kind of disconnected. They don't look like they're playing super well together, which is a problem. I think some of that comes down to some discomfort, like I said before, with Chio on a role he's not super good at, with the Batiste. I think we saw him on Zen a couple of times too. There were a couple weird decisions that the Fuel made. I don't really fully understand or agree with them. And so in some ways, that was one of the things that I think was the problem. I think they'll figure it out over time. I think they will be fine going forward, like I said. I think they'll clean it up. They are a team that sometimes struggles early on in a tournament cycle and then kind of figures out what they are good at and finds a way to make it work. This roster's too talented. And like I said, this weekend they had to play two really good teams who were able to exploit their weaknesses in ways that a lot of other teams in this region can't do. So I'm not too concerned about them, but definitely excited for the Reign. And this was the game where I thought Kai really cemented himself as the best Sojourner in the league right now. He was absolutely incredible. He was popping off and just obliterating the Fuel to the point where it was like the Fuel can't even play. He was just so good. So definitely a scary Reign team right now. I think they are hitting their stride at the right time. You want to get hot right here, right now, going to the Midseason Madness. You've had some of that Kickoff Clash experience. They did well in the tournament. Definitely still have to, try to get over that Gladiators hurdle, but they've beaten the Fuel now, which is a big win. They've beaten the Shock, so really they've proven they can beat a lot of these top teams in the region. Now they're just going to have to do that one final test of beating the Gladiators to really kind of get over the edge. Sunday, Mayhem beat the Defiant. A very good win for the Mayhem. They were very dominant in this game. Hisu had a pretty good performance for the Defiant, I will say. He looked pretty good. Rest of the team did not really look all that great. I thought that it was a good showing from Hydron, once again on the Sojourn. I still think that Surma Jed is a little too aggressive. I haven't gotten the chance to watch as much of Florida as I would have liked because I've been busy. So I'm kind of hoping with this tournament cycle I have a little bit more free time to really kind of watch the team more. And there were definitely some moments. There's a moment on Casino Royale in particular, which was the map that the only map that Defiant won in the series. Like the end of the series where Surma Jed was just in the back line of the Toronto Defiant and just died. I don't know why he was there. It made no sense for him to be there. So it's one of those things where you don't really know why they're doing this. There's a lot of things to question about this team and what they were doing. Not my favorite look from them when stuff like that happens, but when they're playing at their best, they look really good. Someone is very good on that main tank role. I think Hydron is exceptional. Checkmates had a pretty good year. Exi had a pretty decent game on Circuit Royale. Wasn't his best performance. They didn't win the map, obviously, but I don't put that on Exi in particular. I thought he had a pretty good performance. I know that Hisu was just trying to drag the corpse of the Toronto Defiant over the finish line and succeeded on that map, but couldn't do it in any other maps. But I think the Mayhem look very good. They're a team that I think are very interesting. They're a young team. They're very scrappy. They feel like the 2020 Valiant. I will keep saying that. Obviously, they're coached by Gunba, who also was a coach in that Valiant roster, so it's not a surprise they feel like that. And they have McGravy, an assistant coach. He was on that roster, so there's definitely that feel of scrappiness and just like rookie mentality, underdog mentality with this team, and they look pretty good. So excited to see how this Mayhem team continues to develop because I think they look pretty good right now. Shock beat the Uprising, not really a surprise. It wasn't really that close. I suppose Route 66 was kind of close, though. Some of that was just, I think, the Shock kind of throwing. I mean, there was Eichenwald where Finn literally wasn't dying and taunted the Uprising until they finally killed him once. This series was not close. Shock are a much better team. Uprising just do not feel like a great team right now. They are struggling a lot. I think they're still trying to find a way to really get Itzel to work. I think that the team, it's this weird situation where the team looks better when Punk is in, but communication isn't as good, so things break down more. So it's a weird thing with this roster. I kind of had a feeling this would happen to this team because it happened last season where they look good when Punk's playing, but they also have almost an entirely Korean roster, and so they start speaking English when Punk is in, and I think that the communication just falls apart and collapses and breaks down. And so I think that the Uprising have to make some changes. There's some stat that Mikey, whenever he plays, the Boston Uprising never win a map. When he played for the Uprising, he didn't win a map, and then now that he's on the Shock, he beat the Uprising 3-0. So a funny little stat there. Shock much better than the Uprising. It's not really a surprise, but you would like to see a little more from the Uprising. They did not really impress. So maybe they'll have a better run as time goes on, but they're looking pretty weak right now. Eternal versus the Excelsior. This series really just bothered me. I've been complaining about New York for the entire season, pretty much. I don't like what they've done with this roster. I think they made some terrible decisions with this roster. They signed a third flex support who's not even of age until the end of July. It doesn't make any sense. This roster, this team, this organization is a mess. They are dysfunctional. Nothing works. Nothing makes sense. They were running Sojourn, Tracer for so much of this series and looking really good, and for some reason they kept trying to put Yaki on Echo on Control and losing, and I don't know why they were doing it. It didn't make sense. To be fair, they did lose the final point on Sojourn Tracer, but they also went up 99-0 and then threw. So, this New York roster is dookie. This New York roster is terrible. I don't know what weird things that Arc thinks he can get away with, or Nugget thinks he can get away with. This roster is terrible. This organization is doing terrible things. There are too many talented players in this roster to squander it by just building a roster fundamentally wrong in every way, shape, and form. So I am making a call right here, right now. And I need you all to hold me accountable for this. All right? I am done talking about the New York Excelsior. I'm done. I am finished with this team. They have broken me so much. They have pained me so much. They have hurt me so much that I simply refuse to talk about this team anymore. I'm done. I don't want to think about them. I don't want to acknowledge them. If I talk for this team for more than a minute in any other video for the rest of the season, call me out in the comments. If I pick this team again this season, call me out in the comments. This New York team is beyond redemption. They aren't improving. They're getting worse, arguably. Their coaching decisions are questionable. Their managerial decisions and roster building decisions are questionable. They're terrible. I'm done with this team. I am done with this team. I am a Gladiators fan for the rest of the season. I'm a Fairweather fan. I'm jumping on the Gladiators bandwagon. I've always liked the Gladiators, but I'm done with the NYXL for right now. I can't deal with them. Eternal, they played well. They finally got a win. Dove, I thought, looked really good, and I thought Wub had some pretty good performances. And I think their support line did very well, Khan in particular. And Drijo actually had some good performances as well on the BAP and the break, now that I think about it. And I thought they swapped their tank line pretty well. So, Eternal looks pretty good. I'm not going to take that away from them. But I'm done with the New York Excelsior. They're dead to me until they prove to me that they are once again a competent organization. All right? I'm done with them. And until I publicly decree that I think New York made a right decision where they are a competent organization, I'm not talking about them for more than a minute in a video. And if I do, please call me out. Okay. Final match of the weekend was Houston Outlaws against the Vancouver Titans. Very one-sided affair in favor of the Outlaws. Titans did nothing in this series, really. Did not look as good as they did back in the match against the Gladiators. I thought they looked worse against the Outlaws than against the Gladiators. Who knows what that kind of means? Like I said before, I don't think we're going to learn much about this team until we get to the second half of the season, when there is an actual potential chance for this team to do something where the organization kind of fixes some of these issues. The team is able to kind of really play together and stick together because things have not been as good. But with a new coaching staff, very tough schedule this tournament cycle, I think it's hard to really expect a lot from them at this point. But I do think that there is definitely a good chance that they do better later on. And so definitely not too disappointed in them. But Outlaws, like I said, they've impressed me so far. Curious to see if they can keep this momentum up going forward, but they have definitely moved up in my mind. I had them, 6 in my power rankings, I think, after last tournament cycle, but I think they might be better than Florida right now. So, impressive results from them. Real quick, let's throw up the standings. You can see them here. You can see some movement. Outlaws have jumped up to 3rd after a good weekend from them and a bad weekend from the Fuel. Spitfire have jumped the Defiant and the Justice. And are sitting still behind the Rain and the Mayhem. But interesting stuff going on here. Obviously no change in the APAC region. There were no games. New York barely holding on to that 11 spot, but the Eternal are going to probably pass them at some point because I think they look better than the Excelsior right now, obviously. So there you go. There's the standings. Those are my thoughts on what happened this past weekend. Let me know your thoughts on what happened in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this past weekend, if there was anything that really stood out to you that I didn't talk about, let me know. And of course, if you enjoyed this video or like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. That's going to be all, though, for me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.